There was just a special election in Texas, the 34th congressional district. The Democrat essentially vacated the seat. This is perhaps one of the most Latino districts in the United States, a strong Democratic stronghold. Joe Biden won the district by 4 points because of redistricting. The Democratic advantage was plus 15, and yet the Republican just won the seat, beating the Democrat. Here to talk about what is going on is Chuck Rocha. He is a president of Solidarity Strategies. He's a podcast host, a New York Times opinion contributor, also was a senior advisor for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Chuck, thanks for joining us. What happened in Texas 34?
Well, like most things in Texas, in my home state, it's complicated, and let me explain. So the congressman that was there, Philemon Vela, retired. And now he's a lobbyist here in DC. So that caused, because our laws say in every state you have to have a special election because a seat can't stay open for more than 90 days. But what's happened is the seat has been redistricted, and there's already been a primary to fill the seat for full time that will happen in November. But the special election was run under the old lines before it was redistricted. So it was just, as you said on your intro, a D+4, D+5 seat. And it underperformed in the last presidential election, even though Congressman Vela overperformed the Joe Biden number by almost 10 points, again, to your point. So we need to really keep that in mind when we think about this district is much different than it will be in November, where, again, very complicated. Stay with me here, boys and girls. The incumbent congressman next door in McAllen, Vicente Gonzalez, is moving over to run in the much more Democratic seat because they made this seat really a D+15 for the November election because they made the McAllen seat way more competitive and an R+1. And he didn't want to run there. He'd rather run in the safer seat. Plus his buddy, Philemon, was going to retire anyway. So in this special election, in this race, nobody really showed up to vote in a D+5 seat. And guess what? The woman who won the Republican primary and the regular March primary also ran in the special election. Congressman Vicente Gonzalez could not because guess what? He's still serving in Congress next door. So she ran in her primary had won. She ran in the special election against a really no-name former county commissioner named Sanchez. And she wins a historic race, and to your point, David, in the second most Latino district in the United States, which should have sent shockwaves to the Democratic Party, even though it's a special election. Even though the DCCC and the House leadership are like, oh, she'll just be there for 6 months because there's no way she can win it in November, which is probably true. It's the signal that it sends and things that should really be worrying Democrats.
Well, and to that point, I mean, a lot of Democrats point out, hey, Republicans spent over $1 million. The Democrats didn't really spend any. To your point, they just sort of figured, oh, this is just a wash for the next 6 months, so why bother? But again, the message that it sends about Latino voters, I mean, where are Latino voters?
Well, where they are is they're up for grabs. What we've seen is that they're not a reliable base vote for the Democrats anymore. And guess what? We may win this seat back in November, and we should. And Vicente's an incumbent. He's represented that area for a long time. He's probably going to win. But the thing that's really shocking is that there's 5 or 6 other congressional seats that look just like it that Democrats could lose. So it should send shockwaves throughout our party.
And what is it that's going on with the Democratic Party? I mean, why are these races close? Why are the Democrats in danger of losing in Latino districts?
I think it's a number of reasons. One is that for the first time in my 30-year career, Republicans are competing for the vote. People are always like, well, the Republicans now have a great message for Latinos. Well, that's really not true. It's just that they've just now started showing up and competing for the vote. And so that's the biggest difference right now. Is you have that combined with Democrats really taking our vote for granted and not really having any culturally competent campaign consultants. And what I mean by that is there's all these congressional seats that are up that are heavily Latino, that are marginal seats like 50-50 Democrat and Republican, yet none of them have a Latino campaign manager. None of them have a Latino-owned media firm or mail firm. And what that means is you probably lose some of that cultural nuance on how you really get that vote out compared to a white vote. Because if you run the same old election every single time and hope for different results, you're going to be shocked.
Where does the issue of immigration stand with the Latino community? Is it the number one issue? There's some Republicans who claim, oh, Latinos, are just as angry about immigration and open borders as they claim as anybody else.
It's different from district to district. In this race that you just described, David, in the Texas 34th, it sits smack dab on the border in Brownsville, Texas. just across the border from some maquiladoras, where you've seen the immigrant caravans come in, and where you've seen Donald Trump go down and talk about building his wall. Most of the folks down there work for the border agencies. They work for oil companies. They're a little more conservative. So it's just not the same as looking at immigration in Miami or looking at immigration in LA or Arizona. It's different district by district. And so I think you have to nuance your campaign, like I tell Democrats all the time.
It sounds like the Democratic Party, though, is still pretty far behind in terms of connecting with Latino voters, in terms of understanding some of the nuances district by district. Are you optimistic that the Democrats can turn this around by November, or is this sort of a systemic institutional problem right now in the party?
I feel very bullish about the Senate and some of the governors. I think that the Senate campaign committee, the Senate super PACs are doing an outstanding job in places like Arizona and Nevada. They have already outspent the Republicans in Spanish language communication by almost 15-1. So those are good signs that the Senate has woken up. They're taking this issue very, very much as very important to them, and they're doing something about it. What I'm worried about is the House campaign committee and what's been happening in the congressional races. Those what's really bothers me.
A lot of people, of course, concerned right now about guns and gun policy in Uvalde, where the mass shooting happened and 19 children were killed. That's an 80% Latino district. And as I understand it, there were no Spanish news conferences for people there, which is sort of shocking. You're part of Nuestro PAC, which is running an ad now, Spanish language ad on guns. Tell me about it, and what are you doing with this?
Thank you for bringing that up. We're going to go up actually tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with the first in the national history of a Spanish language radio ad, taking Republicans on head on for their support for the NRA and for the lobbyist money that the NRA brings into the U.S. House. There's not been any communication, to your point earlier, David, to the Latino community, who a lot of times get left out, especially when it comes to language nuance. And so we're going to run a Spanish language ad tying the Republicans to what they love to be tied to, which are guns and the NRA, to make sure people know that the NRA is backing Republicans, that Republicans refuse to do away with the assault rifles. They will not do away with 18-year-olds being able to buy machine guns. And we're going to communicate that to the National Latino Digital Buy to make sure that Spanish-speaking Latinos know that Republicans are the reason that most of this continues to happen, because they do not want to do anything about it because they're in the pocket of the NRA.
And because of the nature of Uvalde, as I said, does this issue, in your view, resonate perhaps more with the Latino community now than it might have, say, 2 months ago?
There'll be a lot of pictures of little brown babies that should have not lost their lives in a community that's 87% Latino in our commercial. Because we need to honor those people to make sure they did not die for nothing. And when in our communities, whether it's Uvalde, or I'll take you back to when some hateful person went to El Paso and shot Latinos because of things that Donald Trump had said or messaging that was out there. I won't put that entirely on the president at the time. But it's just these instances in our community where 50% of them only get communication in Spanish and nobody's really talking to them. We want to make sure that when it comes time to blame somebody, that there's a fair fight and they know who's really taking all the money from the NRA.
I've heard from a couple Democratic strategists who suggested because the Senate seems to have this compromise now on gun restrictions and giving more money to the states for red flags, that it sort of takes the wind out of the sails out of the issue, even though the Senate still can bring itself, to your point, to raise the minimum age from 18 to 21 for AR-15s. But is perhaps the messaging on guns right now and gun safety legislation, is it more difficult in part because people will look up on the news and say, but wait a second, I thought there was some sort of deal. I thought we're getting some new restrictions.
What you just described, David, is exactly why we did the ad. We are not going to let the Republicans have a free pass on this issue by saying, oh, we gave a little money to mental health, or oh, we did this little thing on background checks. That's a free pass for them when they have forever said that we cannot do away with assault rifles, which is a big part of this. I'm here in a cowboy hat with a funny Texas accent. I've had guns since I was 13 years old and responsibly know how to handle them. There is no point in my life that I need to own a machine gun or an AR-15 to go deer hunting or quail hunting or to shoot squirrels. Like we're not saying folks don't have the right to have guns. We ain't coming to your house to take your guns. But these guns of war should not be given out to people without thorough background checks and with lots of other things that are just common sense laws that we can't get done because of one thing. That's the NRA lobby and folks worried about losing a Republican primary by saying that they did something minuscule on guns. So we're not going to let the Republicans have a free pass on this.
Chuck, we mentioned gun safety legislation, also immigration. What are the other issues that are resonating right now with Latinos across the United States?
Well, there's an anxiety in the community like there is everywhere around gas and groceries. Normally, most newly immigrated communities overly feel the impact when prices go up because we're normally at the lower end of the scale of income. So seeing that, feeling that, we want to make sure that we let people know that it's not just the Democrats that blame here, that we are trying to get things done and Republicans are standing in our way every step of the way. Unemployment is at an all-time low. There have been 8 million jobs created under Joe Biden. You don't hear Democrats talking about that. We could take a lesson out of Donald Trump's playbook and go out and beat our chest a little bit if we really want to make sure people know who's with them and who's not with them.
Chuck Rocha, he was a senior advisor for the Bernie Sanders campaign. He is a contributor to the New York Times opinion section. He is a podcast host and also president of Solidarity Strategies and one of our favorites here at The Conversation. Chuck, thanks so much for doing this. Good to talk to you, and we appreciate it as always.
Thank you.